Welcome to another episode of the Federal's Worldly Wise, a program where we decode and try to understand what's happening in international politics at the moment. Basically, looking this week at China and India-China relations, which has thawed after a very long time. And we had recently Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting, at the BRICS summit. The elephant in the room, as far as India and China is concerned, is the border dispute, something that really needs to be looked into. There is a history to it. In 1988, India and China took an important decision to keep the border dispute on the back burner and focus on improving ties in other areas. 36 years later, the effect of this decision is being felt keenly. Today, save for occasional hiccups, trade between India and China have boomed. India is heavily dependent on China for many essential goods, including pharmaceuticals, textiles, and electronics. China, too, is benefiting from a huge market in India. Given the robustness of trade between the two, it must have been a happy situation for both, but no. There is political tension, distrust, and periodic flare ups between the two neighbors for the simple reason that the border dispute is not yet resolved. In the last 36 years, China has moved into the world's big league. Today, it is a nation that can challenge the world's sole superpower, the United States, possibly the only country that can stand up to Washington. For example, China has served notice on the US and its allies in the South Pacific and the South China Seas to restore the balance of power in the region in its favor. It challenges claims to the multitude of islands in this region that it claims were usurped by former colonial powers like Japan and the West. It is now a dominant force in South Asia, in a region that was once dominated by India. And Beijing wants to leave nothing to chance. And this is reflected in its attitude to the unresolved border dispute with India. So we return to 1988 and the logic of keeping the dispute in the back burner. At the time, it was seen as a pragmatic move to normalize relations between the two neighbors. Once trade increased and each became dependent on the other, the dispute would be easier to be resolved. But has it turned out that way? Partially, maybe. On the economic front, yes. But politically, the mutual distrust continues. The 1962 war is not forgotten, especially by the losing country, India. That being the case, whether it is the cold freeze or the back burner, the border dispute continues to remain a live issue in reality. Yet, no progress has been made to arrive at a solution that is agreeable to both. How did the border dispute become so intractable, so complex, that many governments have preferred to look the other way in both the countries? The British, after a few attempts in colonial times, drew the McMahon line as the boundary between India and China. This paradoxically turned out to be the very reason for the dispute. When India got its independence in 1947 and the Chinese Communist Revolution occurred in 1949, the Chinese communists took the view that the McMahon line benefited India and wanted it changed. In 1950, China was in the process of co-opting Tibet into the mainland, and the Mao Zedong government realized that Tibet was open to possible interference by India, especially via the Ladakh region. With a view to preventing any future attempt to destabilize Tibet, Premier Chou En-lai then proposed a border settlement in the 1950s. Under this, the border line would be drawn through the Pangong Lake in Ladakh, adjoining Tibet. In return, China said it would not claim Arunachal in the east. It was a give and take arrangement, but the Nehru government was not impressed, as it meant that the Aksai Chin area and much more of the Ladakh region would be lost to India. In the east, Arunachal was anyway part of India, and New Delhi at the time did not think much of China's offer to giving up claim on it. The resulting tensions gave way to the conflagration in 1962. China occupied Aksachin and also moved into Indian territory in the east. Soon, Beijing unilaterally declared ceasefire and withdrew its troops in the east to the pre-war position, but it made no move to withdraw its troops in the west, that is, in the Ladakh region. So, relations between the two froze following the war for 16 years. In 1978, after the death of Chairman Mao, active relations resumed between the two. Over time, the two countries set up committees to resolve the border issue. Several rounds of talks followed, but they made no progress. The impasse also prevented relationship from normalizing. When the decision was taken in 1988 to push the border dispute aside and focus on other areas to cooperate. Today, it has become clear that it is in the interests of both countries to focus on sorting out the border dispute. For since the 1962 war, though there has been no further conflict along similar lines, a micro level tugging and pushing has been going on in the undefined border region. China has managed to gradually inch its way towards the Pangong Lake and build military settlements and other infrastructure close to Doklam in the eastern tri-junction of China, India and Bhutan. In Ladakh too, China has reportedly built infrastructure in the disputed areas occupied by it. It has further gained foothold with Pakistan ceding parts of Ladakh to Beijing in a strategic location that oversees the Karakoram Highway and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Politically, China and Pakistan are thick friends, while that with India remains mired in suspicion. It may have been better for India to have taken the initiative to hammer out a resolution to the border dispute in the 1950s when the two countries were similar in nature. Today, with China in a far more powerful space globally and having pushed itself towards India, it may be incumbent upon Delhi to act on the dispute before it worsens any further. Politically, it has never been easy for India to accommodate China's views, as in 1959, when Chou En-lai proposed that resolution. There is not much of a change today. The only alternative to a peaceful resolution is by use of force or war. That would not be advisable as there is no way of saying which way a fight would turn. A diplomatic resolution is by far the best option for both nations. Else, we will see more of the Galwan Valley type incidents and increasing tensions with the constant danger of an unexpected blow up that can irrevocably damage the two nations.